when my daughter Charlotte shoved me against the antique redwood cabinet in the kitchen and sneered, "Choose now, mother. You're either going to the assisted living facility, or you sleep with the holiday decorations in the old storage cottage." I mean it. I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 slivers. Not because of the threat itself, but because when I looked into her eyes that were once so full of childhood warmth. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. Let's see. I saw only the cold, polished glass of someone who viewed me as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle, an old piece of furniture taking up valuable space. What she did not know is that I had harbored a secret for 3 decades. A quiet, heavy truth that had been locked away, meant to protect her but now weaponized by fate. A secret that, if revealed, would utterly dismantle the gleaming, ambitious life she had built. And in that terrifying, humiliating moment, standing in the kitchen of the house I had sacrificed everything to keep, I decided the time for silence was over. It was time to use the only weapon I had left, the truth. But before we delve into the core of this 20-year betrayal, take a moment to see if you are subscribed to the channel Elderly Stories, and please write in the comments where you are watching this video from. We truly love knowing how far and wide our stories are reaching. My name is Eleanor. I am 65 years old, and for the vast majority of my life, I believed implicitly in the boundless redemptive power of a mother's love. I was convinced that if I simply gave enough, if I sacrificed until the very last bit of my energy was gone, my children would not just recognize that love, but cherish it. Life, however, taught me a brutal lesson. Unconditional love is often mistaken for a blank check, or worse, a doormat. I raised Charlotte alone since she was just 8 years old. My husband, Robert, had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only complex debts and a modest property in Northern California wine country. The land itself was beautiful, dominated by a stunning, ancient redwood grove that felt like a sanctuary, and a small, neglected patch of Zinfandel vines. When Robert left, my first instinct was to sell everything, but Charlotte adored that grove. I saw her little face light up, believing it was a magical forest. I could not bear to strip that wonder from her, so I held on. I worked 2 jobs. A self-taught botanist tending to local gardens during the day, and an online proofreader late into the night. My hands became rough, my back ached constantly, and sleep was a luxury. But every time I saw Charlotte's shy smile, I convinced myself the exhaustion was worth it. I funded her entire education, her clothes, her teenage dreams. When she wanted to go to the city for college, studying business management in San Francisco, I sold the few pieces of heirloom jewelry my own mother had left me to pay for the first 2 semesters. It was at the university that she met David. He was from a prominent family and was studying the same major. I noticed David's thinly veiled disdain for our simple life from the start. When he visited our property, his nose wrinkled at the unassuming house, the wild growth of the redwood grove, and the peeling paint on the main walls. But Charlotte was fiercely in love. And who was I, the tired, sacrificing mother, to interfere with her perceived happiness? They married 4 years later. I drained my last retirement savings to contribute to the extravagant ceremony. David never offered a sincere word of thanks. He just offered that practiced, fake smile and retreated back to his friends in their expensive, tailored suits. That day, amidst the joyous celebrations, I felt a deep, cold certainty that I was losing my daughter not just to marriage, but to a world where I did not belong. The first few years were marked by a polite distance. Charlotte visited sometimes, always rushing, always checking the time on her wrist. I pretended not to notice the ever-widening gulf between us. Everything changed about 3 years ago. Robert, my ex-husband, the man who vanished, died unexpectedly in a private plane crash overseas. I had never imagined the man who abandoned us would have anything to leave behind, but during his decades away, Robert had built a small, successful portfolio through overseas real estate investments. And for reasons I could never fully grasp, he left it all to Charlotte. The inheritance totaled $350,000, an amount that, for us, was like discovering a buried treasure. When the lawyer delivered the news, I saw a terrifying shine in my daughter's eyes. It was not simple joy. It was something far deeper and more unsettling. It was pure ambition. David was right beside her, and his calculating smile sent a profound chill down my spine. In that moment, a dark premonition surfaced, but I immediately suppressed it. Charlotte was my daughter, the girl I had raised with every ounce of love I possessed. She would never truly turn her back on me. How devastatingly wrong I was. 6 months after she received the inheritance, Charlotte and David arrived at my house with a meticulously crafted proposal. They wanted to revitalize the old property, specifically the neglected vineyard and the surrounding acreage, turning it into a high-end agritourism destination with luxury rental cabins among the redwood trees. They needed me to sign some complex legal documents, they explained, temporarily transferring the ownership of the property to their names. This was necessary, they claimed, to secure crucial commercial financing from the bank. Something deep in my gut screamed a primal no, but Charlotte took my work-worn hands in hers, her voice dropping into that sweet, manipulative tone that had always melted my defenses. Mom, trust me. We are going to build something truly spectacular here. You'll finally be able to live out your years in absolute comfort, relaxing in the shade of the redwoods, without ever needing to work another day. You deserve this rest. David, playing the helpful supporting role, added, Miss Eleanor, you deserve peace. We will handle every logistical detail. I signed the papers. May God forgive my foolish, trusting heart, but I signed. Construction began quickly 3 months later. They ripped out the old, modest fencing, renovated the main house until it was unrecognizable, and built 2 sleek, modern cabins where the wild garden I loved used to thrive. The transformation was rapid and jarring, and right alongside the property's remodeling came a brutal change in how Charlotte treated me. First, it was minor. She began correcting my speech in front of David's business associates, saying my simple, worn clothes were inappropriate for the new brand of the estate. Then she started treating me less like the owner, and more like a barely tolerated employee in my own home. She demanded I handle the daily cleaning, prepare meals, and manage the laundry for the paying guests in the cabins. I obeyed, telling myself I was contributing to the new family business. But the situation spiraled downward. David started ignoring me entirely, speaking about me to Charlotte as if I were an inconvenient shadow. Charlotte began complaining bitterly that I occupied the largest bedroom in the main house, claiming they needed that space for VIP guests. They eventually moved me to a cramped, unheated back room space without a proper window that was used primarily as a storage closet for spare linens. Then, 4 months ago, I discovered the absolute brutal truth. I was searching for an old birth certificate in a drawer in the new home office when I stumbled across the property documents. My hands trembling violently, I read the official deeds. The house, the land, the redwood grove, everything was legally registered solely in Charlotte's and David's names. It was never temporary. They had lied. They had successfully defrauded me. I confronted my daughter. That very night, she did not even flinch. She merely stated, with a bone-chilling coldness that cut deeper than any blade, Mom, you are old. You do not understand these kinds of financial instruments. We did what was absolutely best for everyone. Now you have a place to live without the stress of managing property. I attempted to argue, to remind her that I had built this life with my sweat and tears. She simply rolled her eyes and marched out of the room. From that day forward, their treatment only intensified its cruelty. Charlotte frequently called me dead weight, a burden, or a stubborn relic. David would laugh heartily at her cruel jokes about my age, my tired body, and my occasional memory lapses. And like an absolute fool I stayed. I endured the degradation because she was my daughter, and I still clung to the desperate, foolish hope that the sweet girl I raised would somehow reappear. Until that Tuesday morning. I rose early, as always, making coffee for the paying guests and meticulously cleaning the main kitchen area. My back screamed with pain that morning, but I kept working. Around 10 o'clock, Charlotte stormed into the kitchen like a sudden wind, her face blazing with fury. Mother, I explicitly warned you not to touch the guests' things, she shrieked. I stood there, completely confused. But I was just cleaning the cabin, precisely as you instructed. You shattered the porcelain sculpture, she screamed back, practically vibrating with rage. A piece that cost $800. Do you see? You are incapable of helping. You only create damage now. I tried desperately to explain that I had not touched the sculpture, that perhaps a guest had knocked it over. But she had no intention of listening. David appeared in the doorway, wearing that chilling, malicious smile I had learned to dread. Charlotte, my love, we've discussed this, he said calmly, as if discussing the weather. Your mother is reaching the age where she is more of a liability than a help around the business. She is becoming an encumbrance. Charlotte nodded sharply, and then delivered the words that finally irrevocably shattered the last vestiges of my hope and changed the entire equation. Mother, she announced, her voice flat and decisive, we have decided. You can accept placement in the assisted living facility, which we will pay for, or you can go sleep with the storage supplies in the old cottage. You choose. Now. The ensuing silence was deafening. I stared at my daughter, searching frantically for any flicker of remorse, any sign that this was a terrible, desperate joke. But her eyes were hard, resolute. She was serious. This was my ultimatum. It was in that silence that something profound broke inside of me. It was not my heart that had been pulverized months ago. It was something deeper. The crippling fear, the ingrained submission, the idiotic hope that things would somehow improve. All of it vanished. In its place emerged a cold, crystalline clarity. All right, I said, my voice coming out steadier and firmer than I had expected. I am leaving. I choose neither. Charlotte looked genuinely stunned. Perhaps she expected me to beg, to dissolve into tears, or to further humiliate myself. But before I go, I continued, walking slowly toward the hallway, I need to make a single phone call. I went up to that tiny windowless back room, that tight space that had served as my prison for 4 months. My hands were shaking as I retrieved my oldest suitcase from beneath the bed. There it was, the yellowed, heavy envelope I had sworn to keep hidden for 3 decades. Inside, a single document, a secret I vowed to use only in the most desperate scenario. The most desperate scenario had arrived. I retrieved my old flip phone, the one Charlotte constantly ridiculed as an artifact from the Paleolithic era. I dialed a number that was permanently etched into my memory, though I had never used it. My heart hammered against my ribs so violently I thought it might rupture. 3 rings. 4 rings. Then a professional male voice answered. Blackwood and Associates Law Office. Good morning. Good morning, I managed, controlling the tremble in my voice. I need to speak with Attorney Charles Blackwood, please. It is regarding the Robert Davies case. A brief pause followed. 1 moment, please. I waited, listening to the monotonous hold music. Downstairs, I could hear the faint sounds of Charlotte and David's voices, discussing the next guests, living their lives as if I were already gone, a piece of detritus to be discarded. Miss Eleanor? Charles speaking. Are you all right? It has been such a long time since we spoke. His voice was kind, yet laced with concern. Attorney, I said simply, the time has come. I need you to execute the directive we discussed 30 years ago. Silence. Then a heavy audible sigh. Are you absolutely certain, Eleanor? Once we initiate this, there is no possible path back. I am sure. Very well. I will prepare the filings immediately. Can you possibly make it to my office tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock? I will be there. I ended the call and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, holding the heavy envelope against my chest. Inside that envelope was the complete truth I had shielded Charlotte from her entire life. A truth about her father, about the $350,000 inheritance she received, and about the fundamental lie that defined her world. When Robert abandoned us, he was not merely fleeing the responsibilities of family. He was fleeing a serious financial crime. My ex-husband had engaged in massive tax fraud related to an earlier property sale, a complex evasion that ran into hundreds of thousands. I discovered it accidentally a few days before he vanished. I found meticulous, hidden records in his study, revealing offshore accounts. I confronted him. He panicked, claiming he planned to correct the mistake, but it was too late. The authorities were closing in. He fled the country to avoid arrest, leaving me with an 8-year-old child and a mountain of unanswerable questions. What Charlotte never knew was that the money Robert invested and subsequently multiplied over the years was, in its origin, criminally derived. Her inheritance came from a source of fraud and evasion, and I had the proof documents Robert had mailed me years later in a letter of supposed apology, detailing everything, begging me never to tell Charlotte. I kept the letter. I kept the documents. And I kept the secret not for him, but for her. I did not want her to grow up knowing her father was a criminal, or that any money she might receive was dirty. But now Charlotte had used that tainted money to steal from me, to take my house, my dignity, and my peace. I would no longer sacrifice my entire existence to protect her illusion. I walked down the stairs carrying my small suitcase. It contained only a few changes of clothes and some necessary personal items. I required nothing else from that house. Everything that truly mattered was secured inside the crucial envelope in my purse. Charlotte was in the newly renovated living room with David. When they saw me, suitcase in hand, she raised a skeptical eyebrow. "So you've made your decision then? The facility or the cottage?" "Neither," I replied, maintaining a calm exterior. "I am going to stay with a longtime friend for a few days until I have completely resolved my situation." I witnessed the flash of blatant relief on her face. She clearly assumed I was accepting my fate, slithering out of their lives without a scene. David flashed that smug, satisfied smile of his. "A wise choice, Miss Eleanor. It is truly best for all parties." I looked directly at my daughter. She immediately avoided my gaze, and in that instant, I felt one last sharp stab of pain. She was still my little girl, somewhere deep beneath that hardened mask of coldness. But she was a girl I no longer recognized. "Charlotte," I said softly, "are you certain this is how you want to handle this? Kicking me out in this manner?" She finally met my eyes, and the impatient contempt I saw there solidified my absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. There was no hint of remorse, only irritation. "Mother, stop the drama. You will be fine, and so will we. Go." I nodded slowly. "Very well, so be it. But I want you to remember this precise moment. Because in a few short days, you are going to understand that every choice has profound and irreversible consequences." David actually laughed aloud. "How incredibly theatrical, Miss Eleanor. You sound like a tired soap opera character." I offered no reply. I simply picked up my suitcase and walked out the door. I walked down the long, private road until I reached the main highway. I called Lydia, my dear friend of many decades, and briefly explained the devastating situation. Without a single hesitation or question, she insisted I could stay at her home for as long as I needed. That night, lying in the comfortable guest room at Lydia's house, I was unable to sleep. My mind replayed everything. A small, persistent part of me still questioned whether I was truly doing the right thing. But then I remembered Charlotte's detached gaze, her cold contempt, and my determination hardened into steel. The next morning dawned slowly. I dressed with meticulous care, selecting a forest green jacket I had sewn myself years ago. At 9:30, I took a bus into the city center. Attorney Charles Blackwood's office was situated in a stately, old, well-maintained building. The receptionist recognized me instantly, even after so many years. She ushered me directly into his private study. Attorney Charles was older now, his hair completely white, but his look remained the same, penetratingly kind. He rose and shook my hand firmly. "Miss Eleanor, I am genuinely sorry it has come to this terrible point." "Me too, attorney," I replied. "But I can see no other viable path." He indicated a chair and retrieved a thick, well-worn file from the safe. "Very well. Let's carefully review the details from the inception. When Robert came to see me 32 years ago, he was panicked. He confessed the tax fraud. He handed over all the supporting documentation and asked me to hold it as life insurance. Life insurance? I repeated, confused. Attorney Charles nodded slowly. He feared the authorities would eventually pursue his family for the assets or attempt to trace the lineage of the funds, even decades later. That is why he created this specific document, confessing everything, and naming you as the sole, legitimate heir of any assets he might accumulate in the future, thereby protecting Charlotte by keeping the source of the funds technically separate from her. He opened the file and began showing me the documents. I recognized Robert's frantic handwriting on several pages, notarized signatures, and witness statements. But what does this legally mean now? I asked, my head swimming. It means, Miss Eleanor, that legally, the inheritance Charlotte received, the $350,000, should have been yours from the start. Robert left it in her name, thinking it would be less bureaucratic. But this document right here, he tapped a specific vital sheet, effectively nullifies his later will because it was drawn up under duress, hiding the criminal origin of the money. Therefore, the original funds legally revert to you. And since your daughter used those original, tainted funds to fraudulently acquire your property, making you sign documents under false pretense, we have absolute legal grounds to reverse the entire transaction. Is she going to lose the luxury lodge and the business? I asked, feeling a strange mix of vindication and profound sadness. Attorney Charles paused. Not necessarily. That will depend on your chosen strategy. We can certainly return the property to your name and annul the fraudulent transfer. As for the inheritance money, it comes to you legally. Charlotte will be forced to repay the portion she spent. But, he looked at me gravely. Be aware, Eleanor. This will unequivocally destroy the relationship between you two. She already destroyed it. I responded, my voice sounding hollow. When she gave me the choice between the assisted living facility and the storage cottage, she destroyed everything that was left between us. Attorney Charles spent the next 2 hours meticulously outlining every detail of the legal process. I was overwhelmed by the complexity, hearings, deadlines, filings, but one certainty began to solidify. I had every legal right to recover what was mine. I was not begging for a favor. I was demanding justice. I signed the necessary papers to commence the official process. The lawyer assured me that everything would start discreetly. Official notifications would be served. Charlotte would have a chance to defend herself. But he gave me a final stern warning that made me swallow hard. Miss Eleanor, when your daughter receives the summons, she will be enraged. She will likely try to find you, pressure you, perhaps even threaten you. It is vital that you are emotionally prepared for that confrontation. I nodded, though deep down I was terrified. I knew my daughter's temper. But something fundamental had shifted within me since that ultimatum. I was no longer the subservient mother willing to accept any crumb of affection. I was a woman exhausted by being trampled. And that woman had finally chosen to fight back. I left the law office feeling profoundly strange. My body was heavy with tension, but there was a distinct lightness in my chest, as if a monumental weight had been forcibly lifted. For the first time in months, I felt a degree of genuine control over my own life. Lydia was waiting for me on the corner, insisting we stop for coffee to discuss the outcome. As we drank, I narrated every detail. Lydia listened in silence, her eyes welling up when I recounted Charlotte's cruel ultimatum. Eleanor, you have been remarkably patient, she said, gripping my hand firmly. Too patient. That girl needs to learn that a mother is not an insignificant doormat. I am afraid, Lydia. Afraid that I am initiating the wrong path. She is my daughter. And you are her mother, Lydia interrupted firmly. But that status does not require you to accept being treated like refuse. You gave her everything. You worked until your bones ached, and she repaid you with contempt. That is not love, Eleanor. That is exploitation. Her stark word, exploitation, echoed in my mind all the way back to her house. It was a powerful term, but perhaps it was precisely what I had been enduring: emotional, psychological, and financial abuse. And I had accepted it all in silence, simply because I refused to admit that my own daughter, the one I raised with such fervent love, was capable of such cruelty. For days past, 4 days consumed by anxiety, waiting for the inevitable storm, Lydia tried to keep me distracted, taking me for drives through the coast and watching old films. But my mind was fixed on the property, imagining the scene when Charlotte would receive the court notification. On the 5th morning, my old cell phone rang. It was an unrecognized number. My heart leaped into my throat as I answered. Mother. Charlotte's voice was strange, too strained, too controlled. You need to come back to the property. Immediately. Then she simply screamed, Now! And the connection was abruptly cut. Lydia, who was in the kitchen, looked at me, deeply concerned. Was that her? I nodded. She received the notification. The papers have landed. Do you want me to accompany you? I considered it briefly. Part of me craved the security of a friend's presence. But a deeper part knew that this confrontation was strictly between my daughter and me. It was time to face the inevitable consequence of the action I had chosen. No, I have to face this alone. But thank you, my friend, for everything. The ride back to the property felt endless. My entire body was trembling when I stepped off the bus and began the long walk down the dirt road. The redwood grove towered above, casting long, solemn shadows. Charlotte was standing on the porch, clutching a sheaf of legal papers. Even from a distance, I could see the unbridled fury radiating from her. Her face was flushed crimson, her fists clenched white. David stood beside her, but for the first time, he seemed less confident, radiating genuine worry. "How dare you?" Charlotte screamed before I was even close enough. "How absolutely dare you do this treacherous thing to me?" I stopped a few meters away, keeping my voice level. "Do what, Charlotte?" "Claim what is legally and rightfully mine." She descended the porch steps, waving the court papers wildly. "This is an elaborate lie. You are fabricating this entire story to steal the money my father left me." "I am not lying. Everything in those documents is verifiable truth. Your father detailed everything, complete with witnesses and an attorney, long before he died." David approached, attempting to adopt a threatening posture. "Miss Eleanor, you have no conception of what you are starting. We employ excellent corporate lawyers. We will crush this preposterous lawsuit." I looked at him with a steady calmness that actually surprised me. "Do whatever you deem necessary, David. But the fundamental truth remains immutable. The capital you used was derived from fraud, and you tricked me into giving up my home. All of that is thoroughly documented. You have no legal standing. You have nothing." Charlotte shrieked, tears of sheer rage streaming down her face. "You are a bitter old woman who refuses to accept that I have grown up, that I have my own successful life. You are doing this purely out of vengeance." "Vengeance?" I repeated, feeling my own suppressed anger finally begin to rise. "Vengeance for what? For you giving me a choice between an assisted living facility and a storage closet? For treating me like dirt for months? For stealing my house by exploiting the unconditional love I had for you? I didn't steal anything. You donated. You signed the papers of your own free will. After you manipulated me and made me believe it was a temporary measure. That, Charlotte, is the definition of fraud. And you know it." She lunged toward me with such force that I genuinely thought she might strike me. David managed to grab her arm, muttering, "Calm down, honey. This aggression won't help our case." Charlotte violently shook him off. "You want the house? You want the money? Take it. Keep your pathetic money. But never look at my face again. Never attempt to contact me again. To me you died today." Her words were razor-sharp, each one slicing through my composure. But I refused to let her see my pain. I simply replied with a firm, quiet voice, "If that is what you genuinely wish, I accept the terms. But one day, Charlotte, you are going to grasp the full extent of what you truly lost. And it will not be the house or the money. It will be something that no amount of money can ever purchase. I am absolutely sick of your melodramatic stories." She spat out the words with such cold hatred that she scarcely resembled my daughter. "No," I replied softly, shaking my head. "The opportunity to have someone who loved you unconditionally. Someone who would have willingly given her life for yours. That is what you severed today. And unlike property and capital, there is no way to regain that loss." I turned my back on them and began walking away. I heard Charlotte screaming something unintelligible behind me, but I did not stop or turn around. It no longer held any power over me. Every step I took carried me farther away from that life, from that immense pain, from that former version of myself that had accepted being treated as nothing. Lydia met me at the edge of the grove. She had waited, worried, needing to be near in case I required aid. When she saw me, she ran and embraced me tightly. It was only in her arms that I allowed the torrent of tears to fall. I wept for the daughter I had lost, for the illusion that had been shattered, and for all the years of sacrifice that now seemed utterly in vain. But underneath the grief, I also cried with profound relief. Finally, I had chosen my own path. Finally, I had said, "Enough." The following weeks were a dizzying blur of declarations, court hearings, and paperwork. Attorney Charles Blackwood was relentless, presenting every document, every piece of evidence. Charlotte and David hired expensive, skilled defense attorneys, but the documented truth proved stronger than any clever legal maneuvering. The fraud committed during the property transfer was undeniable. I had signed, believing it was temporary, and witnesses confirmed the deceptive nature of their request. The criminal origin of the inheritance capital was questioned, and Robert's confession documents spoke for themselves. During this stressful period, I maintained zero contact with Charlotte. A stubborn part of me held onto a frail hope that she might appear, acknowledge her profound error and apologize. But nothing happened. The silence between us was absolute and crushing. 3 months after the legal process began, the judge delivered the sentence. The entire property, including the house and the redwood grove, was to be returned to my name. The transfer was conclusively deemed fraudulent. As for the inheritance money, the situation was more complex. The judge acknowledged the flaws in Robert's original will but ruled that since Charlotte had spent the money in good faith, unaware of its criminal source, she would not be forced to repay the entirety of the $350,000. The resolution was a settlement. Charlotte would retain half the value of the original inheritance, and the remaining half would be legally transferred to me. Additionally, she was required to pay me compensatory damages for the improper commercial use of the property during those months. In total, I was to receive approximately $125,000. Attorney Charles called me into his office to explain the details. Miss Eleanor, I know this isn't the absolute maximum you deserve, but it is a substantial victory. You fully recover your home, and you receive significant financial compensation that will guarantee your comfort for the coming years. I nodded, still trying to absorb the sheer weight of the decision. And the luxury lodge? The cabins they constructed. They are fixed improvements to the land, so they revert entirely to you, he confirmed. Charlotte and David have 30 days to vacate the premises and remove only their personal belongings. Everything built or attached to the property stays. The irony was profound. They had exploited my maternal love to commit fraud, and now all their hard work, every dime of their investment in the luxury lodge, would legally revert to my ownership. It was undeniable poetic justice, yet it brought me no genuine joy. Attorney, I asked hesitantly, the question catching in my throat, what if I wanted to propose a different arrangement? An agreement outside the strict court records? He looked at me with curiosity. What kind of agreement, Eleanor? I spent the following days in deep contemplation. The legal victory tasted utterly bitter. Yes, I had reclaimed what was mine, but I had lost my daughter in the process. And as deeply as she had wounded me, as cruelly as she had behaved, she was still my Charlotte, the girl I had rocked, the girl who smiled at me as if I were her entire universe. Was there a way to enact justice without utterly annihilating the last fragile thread between us? It was Lydia who helped me shift my perspective. We were sipping tea on her porch when she asked me plainly, Eleanor, what is your ultimate goal here? Is it to achieve total revenge, or is it to find peace? It isn't revenge, I protested. It is simply justice. I know, my friend, she said kindly, but sometimes justice and peace occupy entirely different spaces. You can be 100% right and still be profoundly unhappy. You can win the battle and still lose what matters most. But she treated me like refuse, Lydia. She gave me a choice between the assisted living facility and sleeping with the supplies, as if I were a discarded animal. And that was unforgivable, yes. But answer me this. Do you want your daughter to learn a lesson? Or do you want her to disappear from your life forever? The question stopped me cold. I stared silently into my teacup for what felt like an eternity. What did I truly want? I want her to understand, I finally whispered. I want her to truly comprehend the pain she inflicted. I want her to feel, even if just for a moment, what I felt when she threw me out of my own home. Then perhaps there is a way to achieve that understanding without severing every tie, Lydia suggested gently. That night I formulated a new plan. The next morning, I called Attorney Charles and explained my intentions. He listened, silent for a moment. Then he said, Miss Eleanor, you possess a heart far larger than I ever imagined. I will draw up the documents immediately. A week later, Charlotte and David received a new notification. It was not the execution of the sentence, but a settlement proposal. They were required to appear at Attorney Charles's office for a formal meeting. The numbers. For the first time since they walked in, I saw a flicker of hope on his face. Charlotte, however, remained rigid, her arms tightly crossed. Third condition, Attorney Charles continued. Ms. Davies waives the court-ordered compensatory damages due to her. But in exchange, she retains the absolute right to live on the property whenever she desires, in a designated room that will be reserved exclusively for her. Charlotte and David are prohibited from preventing this, questioning her presence, or interfering with her right to residence. That is utterly ridiculous. Charlotte finally exploded, her voice harsh. She intends to humiliate us, to force us to see her every single day. I felt a sharp sting of pain from her interpretation, but I forced myself to maintain my composed silence. Attorney Charles looked at me, seeking silent permission to proceed. I gave a small nod. Fourth and final condition, he announced, his voice suddenly becoming very serious. Charlotte and David must participate in mandatory family therapy sessions with Ms. Davies once every week for a minimum period of 6 months. This is non-negotiable. Therapy. David practically spat the word out. This is absurd. For the first time since they had entered the room, I spoke directly to them. It is this or the immediate and complete execution of the court sentence. You lose everything: the lodge, the business you painstakingly built, and the opportunity to recover any financial ground from this situation. Charlotte finally faced me, and for the first time, I detected something beyond pure rage in her eyes. There was genuine fear and perhaps, just perhaps, a small flicker of regret. Why are you initiating this? She asked, her voice cracking slightly. If the goal is simply to torture me to rub your victory in my face dash. It is not about winning or losing. I interrupted her, my voice now tight with emotion. It is about making one last effort to save what can still be rescued. It is about granting you the one opportunity to comprehend the extent of your actions. And for me, it is about having the courage to look into my own mirror and know that I did absolutely everything I could to rebuild the relationship. Her lawyer requested a moment to confer privately with his clients. The three of them retreated to a separate office. Attorney Charles gently held my hand. Regardless of their final decision, you are demonstrating tremendous courage, Eleanor. 15 minutes later they returned. Charlotte's eyes were red, as if she had been weeping. David looked utterly defeated. Their lawyer went straight to the point. My clients accept the stated terms of the agreement. We signed the necessary documents that very afternoon. Each signature on the contract seemed to weigh a ton. When we concluded, Charlotte rapidly left the room, refusing to look back. David followed her but paused at the doorway and turned back toward me. Miss Eleanor, he said in a low, humbled voice. I never formally apologize for my calculated role in all of this. I was arrogant, purely manipulative, and I treated you with inexcusable disrespect. I do not expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know I am genuinely trying to be a better person. David, I replied, I sincerely hope you utilize this opportunity wisely, because there will not be a second chance offered. He nodded slowly and left. I returned to the property on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Lydia insisted on accompanying me, and I gratefully accepted her moral support. I desperately needed a friendly face for that moment. The house felt simultaneously different and exactly the same. The luxury cabins Charlotte had designed were, I had to concede, tastefully done. She possessed an eye for design, something she probably inherited from me. But it was not the cabins I looked at first. My gaze was drawn to the perimeter of the redwood grove. The air there was still majestic. I came home. I whispered to the great old trees. I am back. Lydia gently touched my shoulder. Do you want me to stay with you tonight? No, my friend. I must do this part alone. I need to reclaim this space entirely for myself. She understood instantly. She hugged me fiercely and left, but made me promise to call if I needed anything, no matter the hour. I entered the main house slowly, moving as if on unfamiliar ground. Everything was immaculately clean and organized. Charlotte and David had vacated my original bedroom, the large, sunny one, not the storage closet, leaving it completely untouched. My personal belongings were still there, exactly as I had left them months ago. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. It held a lifetime of memories. It was here that I spent sleepless nights when Charlotte was a baby, rocking her to sleep. It was here that I wept when Robert abandoned us. It was here that I dreamed of a better future for my daughter. And it was from here that I had been cruelly expelled, treated like a tiresome nuisance. But now I was home. The house was mine again. Legally, judicially mine. Emotionally, however, it still felt like enemy territory. I spent the rest of the day carefully organizing my things, cleaning, trying to make the space feel intrinsically mine once more. Charlotte and David were nowhere to be seen. They were likely sequestered in one of the luxury cabins, avoiding me. For now, that was for the best. We needed time to process this radical shift in power and presence. The first family therapy session was scheduled for the following Monday. The chosen therapist, Dr. Laura Smith, was highly recommended by Attorney Charles as a specialist in deep-rooted family conflicts, a combination of firmness and compassion, exactly what our broken unit needed. Sunday night, I was barely able to sleep. I mentally rehearsed every aspect of that first session. What would I dare to say? What would Charlotte's response be? Would she even show up, or would she attempt some last-minute excuse? Monday morning, I dressed with deliberate care. I chose a delicate jade green blouse that Charlotte once said made my eyes look brighter. It was a pathetic subconscious attempt to find some connection with her. I knew, but I couldn't stop myself. Dr. Laura's office was situated in a beautifully restored old Victorian house, now converted into a specialized clinic in the city center. I arrived 15 minutes early. Charlotte and David arrived precisely on time, neither a minute more nor less. We exchanged terse, silent nods. The tension was so thick it felt physically suffocating. The receptionist led us into a spacious, yet cozy room, furnished with comfortable sofas and intentionally relaxing decor. Dr. Laura was a woman in her early 50s, with salt and pepper hair pulled into a neat bun, and intensely observant eyes behind red-framed spectacles. She greeted us warmly and instructed us to take seats. I chose a large armchair. Charlotte and David positioned themselves together on the sofa farthest away from me. The silent geography of the room already conveyed everything about the state of our fractured relationship. "Good morning," Dr. Laura began, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable authority. "I appreciate the presence of everyone here today. I understand that choosing to be here was not an easy decision, particularly given your current circumstances. However, the mere fact that you accepted this process is an important and courageous first step." Charlotte let out a quiet, audible scoff. The therapist heard it but made no immediate comment. She simply continued, "Our sessions will operate under some fundamental rules. First, each person will have a protected opportunity to speak without interruption. Second, there are no inherent judgments in this room, only attentive listening and a shared attempt to understand. Third, everything discussed here remains confidential, unless it represents an immediate threat to safety." She paused, observing each of us carefully. "To begin, I would like each of you to articulate, in just a few words, what you hope to achieve from these sessions. Eleanor, would you like to start?" I inhaled deeply. "I hope that we can eventually find some workable path of coexistence. I do not expect things to return to how they were, that is an impossibility. But I hope that we can at least reach a point of mutual respect. And perhaps, who knows, perhaps Charlotte can truly begin to understand the extent of the pain she inflicted upon me." The therapist nodded and turned toward my daughter. "Charlotte." She remained silent for a long moment, then spoke with a brittle, hard voice. "I am here because I was legally coerced. I expect precisely nothing because I do not believe these sessions are capable of changing anything fundamental. My mother has always been prone to drama. She has always played the victim. This is merely one more complex chapter in that endless story." Her words were like sharp physical blows. Dr. Laura made a note in her journal, maintaining her neutral expression. "David," she prompted. He seemed thoroughly uncomfortable. "Look, I simply want to resolve this entire business, so we can move forward with our commercial lives. The lodge is finally thriving. We have guests booking months in advance, but all this relentless tension is completely sabotaging our efforts." "I understand," Dr. Laura said. "So we have three significantly different perspectives. Eleanor seeks respect and comprehension. Charlotte is profoundly skeptical and feels pressured. David wants to resolve the practical, financial situation. All of these perspectives are valid." She leaned forward slightly. "But before we can constructively discuss the future, we must attempt to understand the past. Eleanor, can you briefly tell us how we arrived at this crisis?" And so I began to speak. I recounted Robert's sudden abandonment, the grueling years of raising Charlotte alone, the relentless sacrifices. I described her marriage to David, and how gradually, insidiously, I was marginalized and pushed into an uncomfortable corner. I spoke of the fraudulent property transfer, the deception, and finally, I spoke of that terrible day, the day of the ultimatum. She told me, my voice wavered violently, that I had to choose between an assisted living facility or sleeping with the supplies in the storage cottage. As if I were a piece of discarded equipment. As if 65 years of life, of love, of absolute dedication were worth absolutely nothing. Charlotte instantly burst out. You are deliberately distorting everything. I never dash. Charlotte, Dr. Laura interrupted firmly, holding up a hand. Remember the rule. Everyone speaks in their designated time. You will have your opportunity in full. My daughter crossed her arms, fuming, but subsided into silence. I continued, tears finally tracking down my face. In that moment when she gave me that choice, something inside me died permanently. It wasn't my love for her that never truly dies. It was my self-respect. My dignity, which I had allowed to atrophy slowly over all those months of silent humiliation. And I realized I had to make a choice. Not between the nursing home and the barn, but between continuing to be walked upon, or finally rising up and fighting for the minimum respect I was due. When I finished, the silence in the room was crushing. Dr. Laura passed me a box of tissues. I dabbed my eyes, attempting to regain my composure. Charlotte, the therapist said gently, it is your turn. Please tell us your version of the narrative. My daughter inhaled deeply. When she began to speak, her voice was loaded with pure resentment. But beneath the anger, there was also a discernible sound of pain. My mother has always been this way. Always playing the martyr. Oh, I work so hard for you. Oh, I sacrifice so much. As if I ever begged for those sacrifices. As if it was my fault that she stayed with a man who ran out on her. Every word was a verbal strike, but I forced myself to listen without interrupting. She never allowed me to grow up, Charlotte continued, her voice rising. Always smothering me with that possessive, heavy love. When I met David, she disliked him instantly. I saw it in her eyes, that perpetual silent judgment. And when we decided to live together, she initiated all that agonizing drama. I never created drama. I instinctively protested. Yes, you did, Charlotte shouted back. Not with words, but with those constant sighs, those hurt looks. Always making me feel profoundly guilty for simply wanting to live my own life. Dr. Laura raised her hand, silencing us both. Eleanor will have her chance to respond later. Charlotte pressed on, wiping a tear that escaped down her cheek. When we received my father's inheritance, it was the first time in my entire life I had real capital, some actual possibility to build something completely on my own. And naturally, my mother stood there with that face of inherent disapproval, convinced I would waste every penny. I never explicitly said that. I started. You didn't need to say it. Charlotte burst out. It was stamped all over your face. And when we proposed the lodge, you never truly supported it. You maintained this attitude of I'm supporting, but secretly I think this is a terrible, doomed idea. David placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to soothe her. She took a shaky breath before continuing. We did not trick her with the property papers. We explained the financing details. It was you who didn't understand because you were never interested in these practical financial things. You were focused on your roses and your gardens. That is false. I protested, but Dr. Laura gave me a sharp, warning look. And yes, Charlotte continued, her voice dropping lower, full of exhaustion. I said that horrible thing about the assisted living and the storage cottage, but it was in a moment of extreme stress. I was completely overwhelmed. You were constantly complaining about the guests, always underfoot. Underfoot. I couldn't contain myself. I was working like an unpaid slave in my own home. Your house. Charlotte stood up from the sofa. That is the precise problem. You could never accept that the house was ours too, that we had the right to enact changes, to run our business without you constantly controlling every single detail. Enough. Dr. Laura's voice resonated powerfully in the room. Both of us immediately fell silent. The therapist looked at us severely. I know there is a tremendous amount of repressed emotion in this room, but we will pause. Each of you will take 5 deep, slow breaths. Now. We reluctantly obeyed. The air entered and left my lungs, but my heart continued its frantic race. Better, Dr. Laura stated. Now we will attempt something different. Eleanor, I want you to repeat to Charlotte what you just heard her say. Not your personal belief, not your interpretation. Just her words. I looked at my daughter, then at the therapist. She said she always felt utterly suffocated by me. That I made her feel guilty for wanting an independent life. Continue, Dr. Laura encouraged. She said I disapproved of David from the start, and that when they planned the lodge, I did not offer genuine support. She paused, swallowing hard. And that she genuinely does not believe she tricked me with the house papers. Charlotte was staring at me, surprised. Perhaps she expected me to distort her meaning, but I had truly listened to her pain. Charlotte, the therapist turned to her. Now you repeat what your mother just said. My daughter hesitated, then mumbled. She said she raised me alone, that she made immense sacrifices, and that the day of the ultimatum wounded her severely. Continue, Dr. Laura insisted. She said that something permanent died inside her when I delivered that choice. Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper now, and that she had to choose between continuing to be trampled upon or fighting back for her self-respect. There was a profound silence. Then, the therapist uttered the statement that would fundamentally change the course of everything between us. You are both right, and you are both profoundly wrong. Dr. Laura's words hung in the air like a profound revelation neither of us had anticipated. I looked at her, utterly confused. Charlotte had the same expression. How can we possibly be both right and wrong? I finally asked. The therapist leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. Because in family conflicts, the truth is seldom absolute. Eleanor, you are absolutely correct that you were treated with inexcusable disrespect. Your daughter crossed boundaries that are simply unacceptable. The words she used about the assisted living facility and the storage cottage were cruel, and no external stress justifies that level of verbal dehumanization. I felt a surge of validation, an unexpected comfort, and fresh tears threatened to surface. However, Dr. Laura continued, pivoting her focus toward me, you also need to acknowledge the possibility that you may have been deeply suffocating at times, that your love, however intensely genuine it was, might have inadvertently become an emotional prison for Charlotte. I never intended that, I whispered. I know you didn't, she interjected gently. No loving mother intends that outcome, but intent and result are rarely the same thing. Then she turned her serious gaze toward my daughter. And you, young lady, are correct that you had the absolute right to grow up, to forge your own life, to make your own distinct decisions. But you were catastrophically wrong in how you executed that need. Instead of establishing clear, healthy boundaries, instead of communicating openly with your mother about your needs, you allowed resentment to fester and grow until it morphed into outright cruelty. Charlotte lowered her gaze. And worse, Dr. Laura continued, her voice becoming sharper. You cynically used the immense love your mother felt for you as a weapon against her. You knew deep down she would sign those fraudulent papers because she trusted you implicitly. You may not have consciously planned the trick, but subconsciously, you knew you were taking advantage of the situation. I didn't. Charlotte weakly tried to protest, but her voice failed. And when she finally began to question you, when she became inconvenient, you lacked the necessary courage to face her with honesty. Instead, you chose to humiliate her in a way you instinctively knew would utterly break her spirit. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with truths that had remained unspoken for years. David shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, clearly regretting his agreement to attend therapy. The core issue with both of you, Dr. Laura concluded, is that you never learned how to transition into an adult mother and daughter relationship. Eleanor, you remain trapped in the role of the self-sacrificing, protective mother of a little girl who grew up long ago. And Charlotte, you remain trapped in the role of the resentful daughter who never had the courage to simply say, Mom, I love you, but I need space to breathe. I looked down at my hands, those hands that had worked so tirelessly, that had held Charlotte as a baby, that had sewn her childhood clothes, that had endured pain to afford her a better life. And I asked myself, was Dr. Laura right? Had my love truly been suffocating? I want to propose an exercise, the therapist announced, picking up 2 sheets of paper and 2 pens. Each of you is going to write a letter to the other. But this is not a normal letter. It is a letter written entirely from the other person's point of view. How? Charlotte asked, confused. Eleanor, You will write as if you were Charlotte, articulating what it was like growing up with you as a mother. And Charlotte, you will write as if you were Eleanor, detailing what it was truly like to raise a daughter alone and then be treated in this manner. This feels ridiculous, Charlotte murmured. It is uncomfortable, Dr. Laura corrected gently, which is entirely different from ridiculous. You have 15 minutes. You may begin now. I took the pen with trembling fingers. Writing from Charlotte's point of view? How could I possibly do that? But I began, allowing the painful words to flow without heavy self-editing. I grew up with the certainty that my mother loved me deeply, but that love always carried a crushing weight. She sacrificed so much for me that I felt perpetually indebted, that I owed her my entire life. Every choice I attempted to make felt like a betrayal whenever it deviated from what she silently wished for me. I do love her, but sometimes all I ever wanted was to be truly free to make my own mistakes without the terrifying fear of destroying her. I stopped writing, feeling the tears return. It was intensely painful to adopt her perspective, to imagine that the love I poured out could have been experienced as a burden. When the 15 minutes were up, Dr. Laura asked us to read aloud. I read first, my voice breaking in several places as I spoke the words of my own child. When I finished, I looked at Charlotte. She was weeping silently, her face buried in her hands. Your turn, Charlotte, the therapist instructed softly. Charlotte wiped her face and began reading, her voice thick and choked with emotion. I worked until my bones were brittle just to give you everything I was denied. I watched you grow and honestly believed that every struggle was worth it. I never expected riches or even gratitude, only love. But when you evicted me from the house I built with my own hands, I felt that everything I had ever done meant absolutely nothing. I felt that I meant absolutely nothing. She stopped, completely unable to continue. Tears streamed freely now, soaking the paper in her hands. David placed his arm around her, attempting to offer comfort. Do you see? Dr. Laura asked softly. Both of you successfully reached across the chasm to understand, even if only for a brief moment, the other's pain and point of view. That is the definition of empathy. And empathy is the essential first step toward genuine healing. The session concluded shortly after. We left the office emotionally drained. Charlotte and David walked in one direction. I walked in the opposite. But before we fully separated, my daughter suddenly turned back. Mother, she said, her voice raw from crying. I need time to really think about all of this. Me too, I replied simply. It was not an apology. It was not a reconciliation. But it was something. It was a door that had been opened, even if only a slight crack. The days that followed brought subtle, yet extremely significant changes. I reestablished my routine of living on the property. Charlotte and David managed the lodge business. I focused on my own life. We crossed paths occasionally, exchanging polite, though still cold, words. The paying guests likely sensed the underlying tension, but nobody commented. I started spending hours every day tending the ancient redwood grove. The trees did not judge. They held no grudges. They simply accepted my presence with that quiet simplicity that only nature possesses. Their stoic presence became a silent comfort. I found myself telling the largest tree, an ancient sentinel named Goliath, things I couldn't tell anyone. And the great tree simply stood there, receiving my pain and offering silent strength. One quiet afternoon, I was sketching the intricate patterns of the redwood bark in my notebook when I heard hesitant footsteps behind me. I turned and saw Charlotte standing a few meters away, looking uncertain. Can I speak with you, please? She asked. Of course, I replied, keeping my voice carefully neutral. She approached slowly, as if I were a particularly fragile piece of glass. We stood side by side, both looking up into the immense height of the towering redwoods. I remember when I first told you I hated this grove, Charlotte said softly. I must have been about 12. I told you it was ugly and damp. You got so upset. I remember, I replied. You said it was old junk, and that we should cut it down and build a pool. A sad, genuine smile crossed Charlotte's face. You didn't yell. You brought me a book on redwood history, and we spent the afternoon lying right here where we are now, talking about how they can live for thousands of years and how they protect the whole ecosystem. You made me promise to respect them. We stood in silence for a moment longer. Then Charlotte spoke, her voice low and strained. I remember many good things, Mom. It's not that I ever forgot them. It's that the bad things, they became so enormous. They consumed all the available space in my head. I continued sketching, giving her the necessary time to find the next words. The therapist assigned me an exercise, she continued. She asked me to compile a list of every single good thing you did for me, and a separate list of the bad things. She paused. The list of good things covered 4 pages. The list of bad things was barely 1 page long. And yet, that 1 page was enough to make me despise you. I felt a profound aching in my chest. I don't hate you, she said quickly, finally looking directly into my eyes. I never hated you. I was confused. I was angry. And I was desperately scared. Scared of what? Scared of becoming you. Charlotte took a deep, shuddering breath. Scared of spending my entire life sacrificing myself, smothering myself, of never being anything else except a mother. When I looked at you, I saw a future that absolutely terrified me. And instead of talking about it, instead of processing those complex feelings, I simply pushed you away. But I never asked you to be like me, I protested gently. I wanted you to be happy. I wanted you to have all the opportunities one never had. I realize that now, she admitted, wiping a new tear. But in that intense moment, all I felt was crushing pressure, the pressure to be perfectly grateful, to be the perfect daughter, to somehow compensate for every one of your immense sacrifices. And I knew I could never achieve it. So, I started resenting you for doing so much for me. The brutal honesty in her words left me momentarily breathless. But this honesty was exactly what we needed, even if it hurt like an open wound. And David, Charlotte continued, her voice heavy with self-reproach. He saw my deep frustration and immediately fed it. He told me you were controlling, that I needed to aggressively break free. And I desperately wanted to believe him, because believing him was much easier than admitting my own profound guilt. Did you love him? I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. I do love him, she corrected. I still love him. But I see now that our entire relationship was partially built on that intense shared rebellion against you. And that foundation is deeply unhealthy. I carefully picked up my sketching pencil and began tracing the rough bark patterns again. The repetitive movement helped me focus my scattered thoughts. Charlotte, I began, speaking slowly and deliberately. I accept that I may have been emotionally suffocating, that my love sometimes felt like a cage rather than freedom. But that accepted truth does not and cannot justify what you ultimately did, the words you hurled, the calculated cruelty, the way you attempted to steal my home. I know, she whispered. I know, and I have absolutely no excuse. That day when I delivered that horrible choice about the assisted living and the cottage, I saw the life go out of your eyes, and for a terrifying second I felt a terrible surge of satisfaction because I finally had power over you. But the next second, I was overwhelmed by a horror so immense, because I realized I was becoming the exact type of cruel, manipulative person I always despised. She started sobbing, covering her face with her hands. I became my father. I abandoned you exactly the way he abandoned me. And the worst part, Mother, is that I knew precisely what I was doing while I was doing it. And I did it anyway. I didn't immediately move to comfort her. A part of me wanted to rush forward to tell her everything was fine. But everything was far from fine, and pretending otherwise would only drag us back into the destructive old patterns. What do you want from me now? I finally asked, my voice strained. Charlotte slowly lowered her hands, revealing a face ravaged by guilt. I don't know if I have the right to ask for anything, but I would like the chance to truly get to know you. Not just the mother who raised me, not the woman I pushed away, but Eleanor, the woman you are, with your own dreams, with a life that doesn't revolve solely around me. Her answer caught me completely off guard. I had not expected such genuine, vulnerable depth. I don't even know who that Eleanor is anymore, I admitted honestly. I spent so long being only mother, that I forgot how to simply be a person. Then perhaps we can discover her together, she suggested, a tiny glimmer of hope finally returning to her eyes. No pressure. No expectations. Just a sincere attempt. I looked at my daughter. She seemed smaller, more fragile now. I saw the 8-year-old girl who loved the redwoods, and the 33-year-old woman who delivered the cruelest ultimatum. Both were Charlotte. Both were part of the complex person standing before me. All right, I said slowly. We can certainly try. But with clear conditions. She nodded quickly. Anything. First, total honesty. If something bothers you, you state it openly, immediately, without silent resentment accumulating until it explodes. Agreed. Agreed. Second, clear boundaries. You have your life, I have mine. Can we learn to love each other without living inside each other's heads? Yes, she nodded, drying her tears. And third, I paused because this was the most challenging condition. You need to commit to individual therapy, not just the family sessions. You have deeply rooted issues to resolve that have nothing to do with me, and you must do it for yourself, for your own healing. Charlotte was silent for a prolonged moment. Then she nodded. I already started. After that first session, I discreetly contacted Dr. Laura and scheduled private sessions. I go twice a week. I felt a surge of unexpected pride. My daughter was genuinely committing to change. And you, Mom? She asked timidly. Are you going to pursue individual therapy too? The question was a direct hit. I hadn't considered it. You should, Charlotte said gently. You also have significant healing to do. The way Dad left you, the brutal years of struggle, everything you endured with me. You deserve that space to heal your own wounds. She was right. Once again, my daughter was forcing me to see a truth I was actively avoiding. I will consider it, I promised. We stood there for a long while longer in silence, watching the vast, silent redwoods. It wasn't comfortable, but neither was it the suffocating tension of before. It was just two women, mother and daughter, attempting to find a workable way forward. The weeks that followed brought subtle, yet significant changes. I began my own individual sessions with Dr. Laura, and it felt like throwing open a box that had been sealed for 3 decades. We discussed Robert's abandonment and how that event shaped my approach to loving Charlotte. We explored my pathological need to be needed to validate my self-worth through self-sacrifice. Eleanor, the therapist, told me in one session, you transformed your suffering into your entire identity. You became the woman who suffers, who sacrifices, who endures everything. And subconsciously, you started to need that role. Because if you weren't suffering, who would you be? The question haunted me for days. Who was I, separate from a mother, separate from a victim, separate from a woman who simply endured? I resolved to find out. I started small. I enrolled in a landscape painting course in the city. I had always loved to sketch when I was young, but I stopped the moment Charlotte was born. There was no time, no money, no spare space for my minuscule dreams. Now, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, I took the bus and attended class. The other students were younger, but they welcomed me warmly. I discovered I possessed some latent talent, or at least immense enthusiasm. I painted the redwood grove, the distant vineyards, the dramatic sunset over the property. One afternoon, I was painting on the porch when Charlotte arrived home from the market. She stopped and quietly studied my canvas. That is truly beautiful, Mom, she said, and she sounded utterly sincere. Thank you. I'm taking a course. Seriously? I had no idea you painted. I didn't either, I replied with a half smile. Or rather, I had completely forgotten. She pulled up a patio chair and sat beside me, watching me work. It was the first time in years we had been together like this, with no palpable tension in the air, no heavy unspoken words demanding to be addressed. Mom, she said after a long quiet spell, you look different. Different how? Lighter. As if I don't know, as if you are less concerned with simply being my mother, and more focused on being yourself. Dr. Laura helped me see that I completely lost myself in the role of motherhood, that I forgot how to be Eleanor. Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. In my individual therapy, I've been processing something similar. How did I define myself so completely against you that I forgot to define myself for myself? And are you discovering who you are? Slowly, she replied. It is much harder than it looks, removing all those built-up layers of resentment and expectation, and finding the genuine person underneath all of it. We continued talking, and for the first time in many years, we didn't discuss the past or our wounds. We talked about trivial things. The new guest who arrived with 3 dogs, the changing weather patterns, a difficult recipe Charlotte wanted to try. They were normal conversations between normal people, between a mother and daughter who were slowly learning how to simply coexist. The family therapy sessions continued. Some were incredibly productive. Others were emotional battlegrounds. In one particularly difficult session, Dr. Laura introduced a forgiveness exercise. Forgiveness, she explained, is not about forgetting or justifying the offense. It is about willingly releasing the immense weight you carry. It is a gift you give entirely to yourselves, not to the person who hurt you. She provided us with paper and instructed us. Write, "I forgive you for," and list every wound. I wrote, "Charlotte, I forgive you for evicting me. I forgive you for delivering that cruel ultimatum. I forgive you for cynically using my love against me. I forgive you for making me feel utterly worthless. But most importantly, I forgive you for being human, for making massive mistakes, for being imperfect just as I need to forgive myself for those same flaws." When I read it aloud, Charlotte openly wept. Then she read hers. "Mother, I forgive you for emotionally suffocating me, even when it wasn't your intention. I forgive you for making me feel perpetually guilty, even if it wasn't your conscious goal. I forgive you for failing to see me as an adult. But most importantly, I forgive you for being human, for doing the best you possibly could with the emotional tools you had. And I ask forgiveness from myself for having been so relentlessly harsh on you, when you were only trying to love me in the only way you knew how." There were no embraces that day. There was no grand, cinematic moment of reconciliation. Just a silent, exhausted understanding, a weight slowly being lifted from both our shoulders. Months passed. The luxury lodge thrived under the joint management of Charlotte and David. They were, I had to admit, excellent at it, highly organized, attentive to every guest's need, and creative in their marketing. They paid the rent punctually, kept the property immaculate, and everything ran efficiently. And me? I was diligently discovering Eleanor. I returned to sewing, not out of necessity, but purely for pleasure. I made intricate embroidered cushions that I began selling at a local craft fair. It wasn't much money, but it was mine, earned doing something I genuinely loved. I made friends at the painting course, women my age who were also rediscovering their identities after years defined solely by their roles as wives and mothers. We went for coffee, saw films, complained about our aching backs, and exchanged old family recipes. I finally had a life. My own life. One quiet afternoon, 6 months after that first difficult therapy session, Charlotte sought me out with a formal proposal. "Mom, David and I have been discussing our future. The lodge is doing incredibly well, but we are looking to expand at 2 more high-end cabins, maybe a small event space." I felt my stomach tighten with immediate fear. "Charlotte, I am absolutely not signing any new documents without Dash." "No," she interrupted quickly. "It's not that. We want to propose a real legitimate partnership, official, with contracts, lawyers, everything meticulously in order. You would be a 40% partner, we would retain 60%. You would invest a portion of the money you received from the settlement, and in exchange, you would have a share of the substantial profits and a permanent voice in all major business decisions." I stared at her, genuinely surprised. "Why on earth would you offer me that much?" "Because it's the only fair way to move forward," she replied simply. "It is your original property." "And why now? Why the sudden honesty?" "Because we want to do it correctly this time. No tricks, no lies, no taking advantage of you." David appeared behind her, looking nervous but resolute. "Miss Eleanor, I never formally apologize for the full scope of my role in all this. I was an arrogant, calculating opportunist, and I treated you with unforgivable disrespect. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I am actively trying to be better." I remained silent, absorbing the moment. This version of David was unrecognizable from the man I knew. Therapy was visibly changing him too. "I need time to carefully consider this," I replied. "And I must consult with attorney Charles." "Of course," Charlotte said. "But thank you for even considering the honesty." I did consult my lawyer. He reviewed the partnership proposal and deemed it both fair and generous, considering I was not required to contribute any active labor to the lodge management. We analyzed every single clause in detail. A week later, we signed the contract. This time, I knew exactly what I was signing. This time, we signed as equals. Dr. Laura celebrated the profound milestone in our next therapy session. "This is enormous. You successfully built enough residual trust to actually conduct business together. That is a gigantic step toward true reconciliation. But she was rightly cautious. Remember, she warned, rebuilding trust is like constructing the redwood grove brick by brick, patiently. And one careless action can bring the whole structure crashing down again. We continued the sessions, even when they felt less necessary, because we had learned that problems do not shout before exploding. They whisper for years until no one can hear the subtle warning anymore. In a session 9 months after the start of therapy, Dr. Laura gave us one final exercise. I want you both to write letters of gratitude, not letters of forgiveness or apology, but letters specifically thanking the other person for what they ultimately gave you, even if it was delivered through profound pain. I spent an entire week carefully writing and rewriting my thoughts. The day of the session, I read with a voice that was barely a tremor. Charlotte, I deeply thank you for forcing me to truly see the sick version of myself that I had become. Thank you for breaking me in a way that compelled me to rebuild myself stronger, better, and more honest. Thank you for demonstrating to me that love without rigid boundaries is not love. It is an emotional prison. Thank you for growing up and becoming a woman brave enough to face me, even if it was executed in the most wrong way. And thank you for returning, for trying, for not completely giving up on us, even when doing so would have been the easiest choice. Charlotte read hers, also crying. Mother, I thank you for every sacrifice you ever made, even the ones I resented. Thank you for loving me with such an intense ferocity that it eventually hurt both of us. Thank you for not completely giving up on me, even when I gave you every single reason to walk away forever. Thank you for teaching me, through your example of fighting against me, that it is possible to be strong without being perpetually cruel. And I ask ultimate forgiveness from myself for having been so devastatingly hard on you, when you were only trying to love me in the only genuine way you knew how. 1 year had passed since that terrible, crushing ultimatum. 1 year since my daughter gave me a cruel choice between the assisted living facility and the storage cottage. 1 year since I decided I would not accept either option, and instead I would forge my own path. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and we were hosting a small celebration at the lodge. Nothing extravagant, just a simple barbecue to mark the 1-year anniversary of the new healthy partnership, as we jokingly called it. We had invited the regular guests, a few new friends from my painting class, Lydia and attorney Charles. I was in the kitchen preparing salads when Charlotte entered, carrying an old cardboard box. Mom, I found this in the attic space. I think you might want to look through it. Inside the box were old, yellowed photographs. Baby Charlotte in my arms. Child Charlotte playing among the redwoods. Teen Charlotte at her high school prom, wearing the dress I had painstakingly sewn. An entire life contained in faded images. I remember this specific day, she said, picking up a particular photo. It was from her 10th birthday. We were both covered head to toe in flour because we had disastrously tried to bake a cake that exploded in the kitchen. We were laughing, completely carefree and happy. I remember it well too, I replied, feeling warm tears begin to surface. You declared it was the best birthday of your entire life. It was, she confirmed softly. And it wasn't because of the failed cake or the gifts. It was because you were there, truly present, actually laughing with me. Not the tired, burdened, sacrificed mom. Just you being truly happy. I looked at her. Do you know what Dr. Laura helped me understand? That I became so profoundly accustomed to suffering that I genuinely forgot how to be happy, as if joy were a personal betrayal of my decades of sacrifice. And now? Charlotte asked, her eyes searching mine. Are you happy? I paused, carefully considering the question. Was I? My life was radically different now. I had my house back, but it was shared. I had my daughter back, but she was transformed. I had financial security, my own projects. But was I truly happy? I am at peace, I finally replied. Which, perhaps, is a far greater state than happiness. Happiness comes and goes. Peace remains. Peace, she repeated, savoring the word. Yes, I believe I am at peace too. Finally, David called from the outside area, announcing that the barbecue was almost ready. Charlotte picked up the salads and walked out. I stayed alone in the kitchen for a moment, looking out the window. I watched my daughter outside, laughing easily with the guests. I saw the towering redwoods, silent and steadfast. I saw my property, my house, my life rebuilt in a way I never would have chosen, but somehow more real, more honest than ever before. Lydia slipped into the kitchen and hugged me gently from behind. "How are you, my friend?" "Good," I replied. And it was the absolute truth. "Better than I have been in a very, very long time." "I am profoundly proud of you," she whispered. "Of what you ultimately did. Of how you stood firm but still left the necessary room for mercy." "It wasn't instant forgiveness," I corrected. "It was a difficult process. It is still an ongoing process. The best ones always are," she said wisely. The party was lovely, simple, but filled with genuine human warmth. Attorney Charles made a thoughtful toast, speaking about justice and compassion finally walking hand in hand. People ate, drank, and laughed. It was a normal, beautiful day, perfect in its imperfection. Later, as the guests began to depart, Charlotte approached me. "Mom, there's one more thing I want to show you. Will you come with me?" We walked toward the edge of the redwood grove. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and fiery pinks. "Do you remember when you said I would choose between the assisted living and the storage cottage?" she asked, her voice low. My body tensed slightly. It still stung to discuss that day. "I remember," I confirmed. "I've been thinking about choices," she said. "About how sometimes we present people with impossible choices, trying to pin them down. But the best people, the strongest people, refuse to choose between bad options. They create their own choice." "That's exactly what I attempted to do," I admitted. "And it worked," she said, turning to look at me, her eyes shining in the fading light. "You didn't go to the facility, and you didn't sleep with the supplies. You reclaimed the house. You regained your dignity. And yet, you didn't destroy me completely in the process. You created a third option. Justice tempered with mercy." "It wasn't easy," I confessed. "There were days when all I wanted was pure, unadulterated revenge. Days when I wanted to inflict the exact same suffering on you." "I know. And I would have deserved it," she said softly. "But you chose differently. And that, Mother, saved me. It saved me from becoming irretrievably the horrible person I was rapidly becoming." We stood in silence, watching the last rays of sun disappear over the distant hills. "David and I are trying to have a baby," Charlotte said suddenly. My heart literally skipped a beat. "Really?" "Yes. And I am terrified," she confessed. "Terrified of being a bad mother, of repeating mistakes, of loving too much or too little, of suffocating or neglecting, of being human." "You will be human," I completed gently. She let out a choked, tearful laugh. "Yes. That. Mom, I will make mistakes. Every parent does. I made a host of mistakes with you, but the difference now is that you are fully aware of the risk. You have therapy, you have self-awareness, you have the tools, and you have this." She squeezed my hand firmly. "One day, you will be a present grandmother," she said. "Not a grandmother who does everything. Not a grandmother who takes over the role of mother. But a grandmother who is simply present, who loves, who supports with healthy, clear boundaries on both sides." "I would like that very much," I replied, deeply moved. "And I promise," she continued, her gaze serious, "that I will never ever allow my child to disrespect you, to treat you the way I treated you. Because one of the first lessons I will teach him is gratitude, respect, and that love is never a prison." We embraced there, at the edge of the ancient redwood grove. It was not a perfect fairy tale ending. It was raw, complex, and full of emotional scars that would likely never completely fade. But it was ours, and it was genuinely good. That night, before I finally slept, I opened my personal journal and exercise Dr. Laura had suggested. I wrote, "Today marks exactly 1 year since Charlotte delivered that devastating ultimatum. 1 year since my entire life imploded. If anyone had told me that day that we would be here now, working together, healing together, I would have dismissed them as delusional. I have learned that a mother's love must never mean endless, self-destructive sacrifice. That saying no, that setting clear boundaries, that demanding respect does not make me a bad mother. It makes me a whole human being. I learned that forgiving is not forgetting the pain. It is retaining the memory of the wound but consciously choosing not to allow it to define who I am. I learned that it is absolutely never too late to start over. At 65, I am finally discovering who Eleanor is, separate from motherhood. And that discovery is terrifying and beautiful all at once. And I learned that sometimes to save a relationship, you must first completely destroy the sick, toxic version of it, in order to successfully rebuild something new, something stronger, something honest. I still experience difficult days. Days when the resentment flares up again. Days when I look at Charlotte and vividly remember the cold cruelty in her eyes when she offered me the choice between the assisted living facility and the storage cottage. But I have far more good days now. Days when I see my daughter and fully recognize the incredible woman she is slowly becoming, not despite her massive mistakes, but because of them. Life did not give us a convenient happy ending. It gave us something far more valuable. A hard-won second opportunity. And this time we are both absolutely determined to do it right. I closed the journal and turned off the lamp. Through the window I could see the vast, majestic redwood grove under the pale moonlight. When Charlotte presented me with that cruel choice, she believed she was asserting her power. But what she couldn't have known is that I would create my own choice. A choice that would ultimately save me, save her, and give us both something we believed we had lost forever. A genuine chance to start anew. I did not choose the assisted living facility, where I would wither slowly in abandonment. I did not choose the storage cottage, where I would be humiliated and dehumanized. I chose dignity. I chose justice. I chose the truth. And by doing that I chose life. My own life finally.